So historically, when did ventilation start? Well, methods of artificial respiration were stimulated by attempts at resuscitation. Records show that in 1670, John Mayo, who was an English engineer, had the idea of external negative pressure ventilation and built a model consisting of bellows and bladder to pull in and expel air. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find any pictures of this, but it sounds interesting. Records from the mid-18th century document a bellows-type device as the most commonly used method of providing respiratory assistance. Then the earliest known body encasing iron lung, or tank as we often call them, was built in 1832 by Dr. Dalziel in Scotland. Again, I was unable to find any pictures, but it's well recorded that he developed this device. This development was followed by a wide range of tank and cuirass devices that operated on the principle of enclosing the chest and using negative pressure to passively expand the chest and inflate the lungs. In 1876, Dr. Wallace in Paris developed the first really workable iron lung. These are some pictures of ideas for iron lungs. They were patented in America, but they were never commercially produced. And this is from Emerson in 1978. This is a picture of the iron lung developed by Dr. Wallace in Paris, and as you can see, it's pretty much the same as current iron lungs, except the bellows at the back is operated by hand. And this again is from Emerson in 1978. In the 20th century, there were a number of designs in the early part of the century from Eisenmenger, Davenport, Hammond, and lots of others, but none of them were commercially produced. The first commercially produced iron lung was built by Drs. Philip Drinker and Lewis Shaw in 1928, and it was the first one to be widely used. Namely, it was first used in the polio epidemic of 1928, very successfully. However, it was a very big and heavy unit. In 1931, the Emerson respirator was developed, and this was a lighter and simpler device design, and it was able to be produced in large numbers for the following polio epidemics. And additionally, it had an electric motor that could also be operated by hand during power failures. So on the left-hand side, there is a picture of the 1928 Drinker and Shaw model, and on the right-hand side, there's a picture of the 1931 Emerson model. Just for interest's sake, this is a picture from 2009. 2007. The lady in the iron lung there, her name was June. She was in an iron lung from 1949 till the end of 2009. So 60 and a half years she lived in the iron lung. And that particular one that she had there was an alligator opening one, so it opened up like this. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see a picture with two weights on the end. They were counterweights, so that as the lid came up, the counterweights held the lid in position so that you could then work with the client. And then on the bottom two right-hand pictures are the motor that was attached to that iron lung that June was using. And you can see the middle picture, the bellows is expanded, so this is inspiration, and in the right-hand picture, it's collapsed, and that's during expiration. Unfortunately, June died at the age of 83 at the end of 2009. This is a more modern iron lung motor. So this motor took the place of that one in 2007. This is a cuirass or chest shell. This one was designed and built at Fairfield Hospital in Melbourne, and unlike the turtle shell ones, it only covered the front, not the front and back, but you had to be on a flat surface for it to work. So the dome, the yellow dome that you can see, is made of fiberglass, and around the edges of that dome is high density foam so that no air would seep in underneath, and it was held in position by straps with Velcro that was just taped onto the front. And on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see the motor that operated that chest shell. This form of ventilation was very effective in enabling June to get out of bed. She could go in a van with that and do all sorts of things. One disadvantage of it was that the space available to provide ventilation was only as big as the shell. So the ventilation was less effective in a cuirass than in an iron lung. Luckily for June, she had the capacity to frog breathe, to augment the breathing from the machine by frog breathing herself. So she would have both happening at the same time. Oops, sorry, missed one. Copenhagen 1952, mentioned by one of the earlier speakers, was a turning point in ventilation. A shortage of iron lungs resulted in teams of nurses and medical students using anaesthetic equipment to sit by patients' bedsides and ventilate them by hand for days or weeks, or until either they no longer needed a ventilator or until an iron lung became available for them to use. From this developed mechanical bag squeezers, and gradually these have evolved over the last 60 or so years into the very sophisticated ventilators you see in intensive care units in hospitals today. And you'd see them on shows, on medical hospital shows like, what was that one? I can't remember their names. Anyway, hospital shows would often have what looks like a ventilator and someone attached to it. Positive pressure ventilators in the early stages were used. The ventilation was delivered by intubation, so either a tube going through the mouth and into the chest, or a tracheostomy tube, so a hole in the neck with a short tube going into the chest. Initially, ventilators were used only in intensive care units in hospitals because they needed pressurised oxygen to operate them and to run them, and specialised staff to operate them. So on the left-hand side there, you can see the Bird Mark 7 ventilator. This was the first ventilator introduced into intensive care units, and it came in 1958. And then on the other side, you can see the more complex version that's currently used in intensive care units today. Portable positive pressure ventilators, what we use in the community, and they became available in Australia in the mid-1980s. The first models we used at the hospital where I work were the LP3, followed by the LP4 and the LP6, and the Puritan Bennett companions, all of which delivered a preset volume of air by mask or by tracheostomy. They operated on room air, so they didn't require any pressurised oxygen connections or any medical air connections. They just operated on room air, but you could add oxygen to the circuit if the person needed, if they were acutely ill or if they had some other lung disease happening. And in addition to delivering an adjustable volume, breath rate and sensitivity, they also had high and low pressure alarms and an internal battery, so that if there was an issue with the individual, say someone was being ventilated by tracheostomy and they became disconnected, the alarm would go off so that the staff member would be alerted to an important problem and would attend quickly. And also the internal battery gave you a couple of hours of operating time in the event of a power failure. So these are two of the positive pressure ventilators that I've personally used. On the left-hand side is an LP10, which was the last model that I had of that brand. And on the right-hand side, from the 1990s, is a Briaz brand ventilator called 401. These were all used for non-invasive and invasive ventilation, so by mask or by tracheostomy. These are some of the following versions. So all of these ventilators work by pushing air into the lungs through a mask, or a full-face mask, a nasal mask, or a tracheostomy tube. And again, these machines are from the 1990s. Positive pressure ventilators, again, exhalation occurs passively. So the machine pushes air in and then ventilation stops and you exhale passively, as you and I do when we're breathing normally. Breathing in is active, exhalation is passive. So again, these are more up-to-date units. The Briaz on the left, the top left-hand side there is from 2002, and then the VS Integra, which is a multifunction unit, and the VS Ultra from 2008, and then the VS3 from 2010. All of these machines work with positive pressure volume cycled ventilation. The VS3 has multifunctions, so you can use it in bilevel mode or in volume mode, and you can have a number of different functions. So the ventilation has become more sophisticated over time. So the Briaz 403 was a very straightforward machine. It pushed air in and then let you breathe out, but it didn't do anything else. The VS3 will give you a breath of a particular size for a particular duration with a particular flow pattern, and there's many more things that you can adjust to customise the ventilation to the individual's needs rather than just having a machine that just blows air for a set time. These are more modern, up-to-date versions. So the Elysee 150 was introduced in 2010, the Puritan Bennett 560 was introduced in 2011, and the Astral 100 and 150, 201, that's meant to say 2014, not 201, sorry about that. All of these machines have, again, multiple functions and can be operated in many different modes. And one of the best things about these particular machines is that they will give the clinician and the user a lot of feedback about how the ventilation is going. So they have many different alarms, and with these particular models that you can see up there, instead of having a 2-hour internal battery, they've got a 6 to 8 hour internal battery. So the more demand that's placed on the battery, the less time it will last. But with experience, we know that even with the greatest demand placed upon it, the internal battery will last about 6 hours. So that's really very good, because you can go out somewhere and do something nice in 6 hours where you couldn't get out very far in 2 hours without taking an enormous heavy battery with you. Bilevel ventilators, such as the BiPAP and VPAP machines, became available in Australia in 1991. They were developed following Dr. Colin Sullivan's 1980 invention of CPAP, which is continuous positive airway pressure. And CPAP machines were developed for the management of obstructive sleep apnea. Bilevel devices are used for the support of ventilation, so they're different things. Bilevel devices deliver air in both the inspiratory and expiratory phase, and also have adjustable settings, and some models also have alarms and internal batteries. These are some of the early models of bilevel devices. These ones were from the 1990s, and these ones are some of the more current ones. The top right-hand one and the 3 on the bottom are models that we're still using, but the other 2 are models that we're phasing out because they've been superseded by the ones underneath. These are brand new models that have come out in the last 18 months. The Loomis ST, the BiPAP 830, the BiPAP Dream Station, and the Lowenstein Bilevel. All of these have the capacity to ventilate someone up to a set pressure decided by the clinician, and with breath rate and other variables that you can again customise the ventilation, whereas in the earlier models you could select a pressure and a rate and that was all you could do. You couldn't adjust the flow patterns to make it more comfortable for the individual. You can do that on all of these machines, and the 2 machines on the right hand side both have internal batteries. So again, someone who's using bilevel device and normally only uses it at night, wants to go out and they're a bit concerned about getting fatigued through the day, they can take their machine with them, leave it in the car, and if they get tired, they can go and get their machine and just sit down and use it for a little while and help catch their breath. So what is non-invasive ventilation? So non-invasive ventilation is the use of a machine to support or replace a person's own breathing efforts. People whose breathing is compromised by an illness or injury may require mechanical ventilation to regulate their oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. Most of the patients that we care for in Victoria, and we have about 900 on ventilators, most of them use the bilevel devices, and a few use the more life support devices. So breathing in post-polio, as the muscles weaken, breathing becomes more difficult. When you're awake, you can use your accessory muscles to improve your breathing, but you can't use accessory muscles when you're asleep. So you then develop symptoms of respiratory insufficiency or hypoventilation. And the symptoms that you would get include waking frequently at night, having headaches in the morning, being short of breath or fatigued during the day, particularly after activity, daytime sleepiness, inability to concentrate, and frequent colds and chest infections are all symptoms of incipient respiratory failure, and they should be reported to a physician. And if you have any of these symptoms, discuss it with your GP and seek a referral to a sleep specialist or a respiratory specialist for further investigation. So why would you use non-invasive ventilation? Well, breathing is less efficient during sleep because we're not using accessory muscles. So muscle tone goes down, breath volume goes down, and you get less ventilation. In people that don't have any muscle weakness, that's not a problem, that's normal. But where muscle weakness exists, then you can have nocturnal hypoventilation. Non-invasive ventilation will improve the nocturnal hypoventilation by giving a larger volume of air than you can breathe independently. It will reduce the level of carbon dioxide in the blood to more normal levels, improve the sleep by doing that, and also improve other respiratory symptoms. How does it work? So it delivers air to the user via a mask and tubing, or in some cases by a tracheostomy. When you breathe in, the machine follows you and delivers air until you start breathing out. So the pressure goes up as you breathe in, and when you begin breathing out, the pressure drops down to allow you to exhale properly. Again, I'll say non-invasive ventilation CPAP is not non-invasive ventilation. What CPAP does is blows a continuous amount of air, a low flow of air, into the upper airway to hold your throat open so you can get a normal breath by yourself. But bilevel ventilation helps you breathe or breathes for you whatever is required on a breath-by-breath basis. So why use NIV? Well, sleep studies have shown evidence of improved sleep. Better sleep results in better daytime function, and non-invasive ventilation has been associated with improved quality of life in questionnaires and assessments. Sleep. What's sleep? So good quality sleep is important for all of these things. Good health, good cognitive function, alertness and vigilance, rest and recovery, and quality of life. If you sleep poorly, you have a bad day. If you sleep well, you have a good day. Makes sense. This slide shows a sleep study before non-invasive ventilation, and what we want to look at is the very top line. The grey line at the top, up here. So all the grey bits is when the person's awake, and then you can see down here numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, and this are the stages of sleep. And this little bit here is REM sleep. Now, normally we have several cycles of REM sleep a night, and the cycle will last between 30 and 90 minutes, depending upon the individual. But this person had only one very short burst of REM sleep in a whole night in 7 hours of sleep study, and they spent most of the time awake. This person was then commenced on a ventilator, and this was their sleep afterwards. So you can see that there's 4 sections of REM sleep in that one, and over the night, they've spent nearly all the time in some stage of sleep, whereas in the previous slide, they spent most of the time awake. So you can see ventilation is very effective at improving someone's sleep. And as I said, you have a good sleep, you have a good day. So non-invasive ventilation in post-polio is used to support the breathing. Most users would need it only at night. Some may need to increase their hours on ventilation as they age, and some will eventually require 24-hour ventilation, although I must say that's quite uncommon in my experience. Other considerations to think about when using non-invasive ventilation is oropharyngeal secretions. Some people get a sort of a hay fever reaction to having a lot of air blown up their nose, and their nose can get a bit runny. Other people have the opposite problem. They get very dry, and they can have problems with little bits of nose bleeding. So it's important to get the humidification correct for each individual. Another thing that's very common is gastric distension. So when you're blowing air up in someone's airway, one of the natural reactions is to swallow. So they tend to get a belly full of air. So that's one thing so there's different ways of managing that. One way you can manage that is by adjusting the settings on the ventilator to allow the person to swallow between breaths rather than swallow during a breath. Skin breakdown from mask can be another issue, so you might have a person who's using a mask ventilation, they might need to have 2 or 3 different masks so that pressure is applied in different points at different times. So you're not always having the pressure on exactly the same spot, because once you've got a pressure sore, particularly on the bridge of your nose, which doesn't have very much fatty tissue underneath it, once you've got a pressure sore, it's very hard to put a mask back on there. And if you need ventilation every night and you can't put a mask on, then you're not going to do well. One of the other issues that we find is mask intolerance. So then you might have to investigate other masking options. Full face, nasal pillow and oral are ones that you can do. And then finally, as time goes on, people may become more dependent, so you would need to consider whether they need a backup ventilator or an external battery to operate their machine. There you go, all done.